Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Cognitive, Abhorrence, out May 17th on Metal Blade Records. The album has 10 tracks, 36 minutes in length, and this is the band's 5th full-length studio album. They are an American death metal band. And coming into this record, I was expecting the overall feel, the overall album design structure to be very compact and to be very dense. 10 songs, 36 minutes, it kind of plays into it. The album is compact and dense, but it's also dynamic at the exact same time. It has enough nuances, it has enough ripples that allow the uniquenesses of the songs to really come to the surface and suppress to a certain extent the commonalities that exist across each and every single song. This makes the experience more fluid, this makes the experience more dynamic, and it doesn't allow you to feel like every single song is taking you in the same path, in the same direction, with the same purpose. The album does offer a few twists and turns which keeps you glued, keeps you connected, and makes the experience of going from first to last a lot more entertaining, a lot more enjoyable. Now, as far as the sound is concerned, to say that this is a heavy album, that's an understatement. I mean, this album slaps. This album is heavy, it's brutal, it has a lot of intensity, it has a lot of aggression, and it has a lot of sound. It's a big sounding record, where that big sound is not always defined by the heaviness and brutality and aggression, but also by the texture of the elements themselves. So it's an album that has a lot to offer, that has a lot of layers, and at first glance, what you take from it is the brutality, is the heaviness. That's what you stay with, and that's what hits you, because it's easy to see it, it's easy to appreciate it, it's easy to hear it as far as what it gives you, an avalanche of sound from the first all the way to the last track. But the more you listen to the record, the more you digest the sound, the more you break it down, the better it is, and the more you understand all the layers that went into creating this experience. So the album becomes a lot easier to process with time, because of that brutality kind of becomes a little bit more of a second nature. It's easier for you to appreciate what the album is all about, because you're not just concentrating on how heavy it is. But at first glance, that heaviness, that brutality really takes hold. The sound on the album allows it to really come into the forefront. It's an album that doesn't feel and doesn't sound overly produced, but it's worked enough that you're able to feel the brunt of the record the first couple of times that you listen to it, and then you start to see a little bit better the forest from the trees. And what are those trees? Well, the guitar sound on this album is one of the main pillars of the record. I think it plays an incredibly important role in terms of what gives to the sound, not just from a brutality and heaviness standpoint, but also how it allows it to cut a little bit deeper and allows you to see the more mobile side of the sound that feels melodic, that feels groovy, that feels technical, that cuts through that heaviness and allows the record to have a little bit more life, not just in the boundaries, but deep within it, which makes the record feel richer sound-wise all around. It's, like I said, not just about being heavy, but also offering quality within that heaviness. And the guitars play a huge role in that, because the meat of the meat and potatoes of this album, of the sound of this record, of the heaviness and brutality of this record, really starts with that really thick guitar sound that matches extremely well to the also very thick drum sound. So together, that's where you get that sense of heaviness coming at you, not just with the volume, but with the thickness and substance behind it as well. But then you see the guitars pushing in some technical elements, allowing it to be a little bit more driven, some dark melodic riffs that become really penetrating, that create also a different kind of atmosphere, that allow the songs, like I said, to feel and sound richer. So the guitar sound all around becomes such an important element. It becomes an important element in the density that the album has, but it also becomes an important element in how you dilute that density and allow the album to become easier to digest for the listener. Now, the drums, like I said, really packed the sound in. I felt like they had more of a constant role throughout the entire record. Not as lively, not as rich, not as dynamic as the guitar sound, but that's to be expected. It's more of the anchor that holds this whole thing together. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the bass, because the bass at times, I felt like it was a little bit disconnected from where the song was trying to go, or from where the song was going. When the bass pops into the mix, it's not like it pops in and it feels jarring. That's not the case. I actually like when the bass comes in It's just the execution of the bass sound on some of these tracks, because it's not breaking away from the overall wall of sound. It's not breaking away from the melodies and rhythms of the song with its own riffage, if you will. It just feels a little bit too much. It's not adding texture to the song. It's not making the song feel richer. It just feels like it's one of those elements that could be a little bit deeper in the mix and somehow made its way all the way to the surface. If it's going to go all the way to the surface, I would like it to have more of its own distinct role. That would work better, specifically in the tracks that have a little bit more of a technical guitar sound behind them, would match that same experience a lot better, making the songs feel a little bit more constant, giving it a little bit more of a constant substance to them, and not necessarily have this piece of the puzzle that sometimes pops out of place, or at least it feels like it pops out of place. At least that's my experience when it came to the bass sound throughout the entire record. Now, when it comes to the vocals, I really like the vocal performance. I feel like the vocals are one of those constant elements that help add intensity, aggression, volume, and heaviness to the overall sound of this album. They definitely complement what's sitting behind them, and they complement that sound extremely well. I like the dynamics of it. I like how they push some boundaries. They are constant in terms of what they give. They're not necessarily constant in terms of how they give it. And that to me is another key important role in order not to have tracks start to feel repetitive. And like I said earlier, allowing you to better see the forest from the trees. 36 minutes of face-melting, unconditional aggression. This is a heavy album, but I feel like at first glance it might seem like it's heavy for heavy's sake. The more you listen to it, the more you see the work that went into it, and actually the texture and richness of sounds and elements that make this a big volume sounding album with a lot of heaviness and aggression, but more with purpose, less of just being there for the sake of being there. As far as favorite songs goes, I want to start off with Insidious. This is pretty much a synopsis of the record, an avalanche of sound coming at you. You just feel like it's just never going to stop. Nothing is going to stop it. This track kind of has that essence built into it. You're going to hear the bass really peeking through in this track. And this one working a little bit better because it's not one of those songs that really pushes the technical side of the band into the forefront. And because of that, it worked well, but I would have liked to see the bass, like I said earlier, a little bit more, not hidden, but a little bit better integrated into everything that is happening into the track, and not having this almost fuzziness that comes through with it in a song like this. Now, overall, the guitars and drums offer that sense of consistency. They offer that sense of aggression and heaviness, which is pretty much a staple throughout the entire album. And then the intensity musically and vocally just feels like it gets turned to 11. This is a track that has this ability to just take the next step forward and push another level on top of it, so that you're never really sure exactly where it's going. Like, could it go even higher? Could it feel even heavier? It's a track that has some internal movement that makes the song memorable because of it. Now, there is also some darker penetrating riffs, and those are important in order to give some texture to the song, in order for the song to not just be this avalanche of sound, in order for that avalanche of sound to still give you some moments of clarity within it, or at least where you can see what is happening within that overall heaviness. And this track does it really well, using the guitars with that purpose of cutting a little bit through and offering something slightly darker and not necessarily just something that's consistently heavy. Next we have Ivory Tower, slower, heavier, groovier moments within this track, and then you have this setup that allows the faster, more driven, heavier side of the song to really come in and feel even heavier, even more driven, even faster. The slower moments really build up towards the faster moments, and that gives the song this incredible ebb and flow. It's like two different sides of the same coin. The drums add to the overall depth of the song, to the overall consistency of the song, and then the guitars add the ability to sometimes break away, the ability that you have to have these two different sides of the same coin. Like I said, a lot of it's really defined by the guitar sound, but also by the vocal dynamics. It's a very dynamic track vocally. It has a lot of movement. It perhaps has more movement vocally than it has musically, and that also adds to the big picture of how this track comes across. Great guitar solo. I love the darkness that the song has, and I love the moments of clarity that come through certain key pieces. The solo is one of them. The solo definitely adds a moment of clarity, even though it's a clarity that has some darkness behind it. Last but definitely not least, Containment Breach, one of the most brutal songs on this record, and I mean brutal both musically and vocally. And when you listen to this album, you almost feel like the album is so heavy, it's so brutal, it's so aggressive that certain songs feel like it's the peak. Okay, it's not gonna go above it. And then a track like Containment Breach comes in and it's like, forget about what you thought about how high they could go with that element or how much they could push heaviness on this album. Containment Breach then just absolutely breaks through the ceiling, and it's a song that, like I said, very heavy and brutal both musically and vocally. It's a meat grinder style track. It just has this great tempo, a lot of heaviness, a lot of layers, feels really thick, it feels like it has a lot of substance, and then the guitars bring in some technical elements and some groovy elements that allow that overall thickness and heaviness and meat grinder approach to be a little bit easier to digest. You need some pockets in order for the song to not overwhelm the listener, and infusing those more technical and groovy elements guitar-wise, while not necessarily creating pockets, it dilutes a little bit of that heaviness ever so slightly for the song to at least find some spaces to breathe and breathe better, so that the heaviness can be as relentless as possible. I also enjoy the cleaner vocals on this track. Talk about adding pockets where the song can breathe. Those pockets are also there vocally, not just musically, and that was a nice add-on, a nice little caveat that made this song unique because of how heavy it is, and then to have that element that normally dilutes the heaviness working almost one against the other makes this track have incredible life within it. This is it, Cognitive, Abhorrence, out May 17th. Let me know your thoughts about the band, about the singles. Hit me up in the comment section, and I'll see you all at the next video. Take care, guys.